The rusty chain biker bar was thick with cigarette smoke, and the sound of pool balls clicking when 7-year-old Emma Martinez burst through the heavy wooden doors. Her small dress was torn, tears streaming down her dirt-stained cheeks as she screamed at the top of her lungs, "They're hurting my mama! Please help." The room went dead silent. 20 leather-clad bikers turned to stare at the trembling child standing in their doorway. Most people in Millbrook crossed the street when they saw these men coming. Their leader, Marcus "Tank" Rodriguez, was a mountain of a man with arms covered in tattoos and scars from countless fights. Everyone expected them to turn away, to tell the kid to find a cop instead. But Tank slowly stood up from his bar stool, his massive frame casting a shadow across the little girl. He reached for his keys, his voice cutting through the silence like thunder. But what would these outlaws do when they discovered who was hurting Emma's mother? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 6 months earlier, Maria Martinez had packed everything that mattered into 2 suitcases and a backpack. Emma's favorite stuffed rabbit, the few family photos that survived Jake's rages, and her grandmother's wedding ring hidden deep in her coat pocket. The ring was all she had left of the woman who raised her, the woman who would have told her to run sooner. "Where are we going, Mama?" Emma had asked as they waited at the Greyhound station in Phoenix, her small hand clutched tightly in Maria's. "Somewhere safe, Mija. Somewhere your papa can't find us." But Jake Sullivan wasn't really Emma's father, just the man who'd married Maria when Emma was 3 and gradually revealed himself to be a monster. The bruises had started small, explained away as accidents, clumsiness, her fault for making him angry. Then came the isolation, cutting her off from friends and family, making her dependent on his approval for everything. The final straw came when Jake raised his hand to Emma. That night, while he passed out drunk on the couch, Maria gathered their belongings and ran. Millbrook seemed like the perfect hiding place, small enough to disappear in, far enough from Arizona that Jake would never think to look. Maria found work at the diner on Main Street and cleaning offices at night. The pay was barely enough, but it kept them fed and housed in the small duplex on Maple Avenue. Emma adapted better than Maria hoped. She made friends at school, laughed again, stopped flinching when doors slammed. For 6 precious months, they built something resembling a normal life. Maria should have known it couldn't last. The knock came at 8:30 on a Tuesday evening. Emma was doing homework at the kitchen table while Maria folded laundry. Through the peephole, Maria saw a familiar silhouette that made her blood freeze. Jake stood on her doorstep, swaying slightly, a beer bottle dangling from his fingers. He looked thinner than she remembered, meaner. Prison had not been kind to him. "I know you're in there, Maria," he called through the door, his voice carrying that dangerous edge she knew too well. "Open up. We need to talk." Maria grabbed Emma's hand and pulled her toward the back door, but Jake was already walking around the house. He'd learned her escape routes long ago. "Mama, I'm scared," Emma whispered. "I know, baby. We're going to be okay." But Maria wasn't sure she believed it anymore. Jake kicked in the back door with a crash that splintered the frame. He'd been drinking for hours, maybe days. The smell of alcohol and rage filled the small kitchen. "Thought you could run from me?" He grabbed Maria by the wrist, twisting until she cried out. "Thought you could take my kid and disappear?" "She's not your kid," Maria said, finding courage she didn't know she still possessed. "And I'm not your property." The beer bottle shattered against the wall where her head had been a second before. Glass scattered across the linoleum floor. "Get in the bedroom, Emma," Maria said quietly. "No." Jake's voice boomed through the small house. "She stays right here. She needs to see what happens to women who don't respect their men." Emma pressed herself against the refrigerator, her small body trembling with terror. Jake advanced on Maria, backing her against the counter. "You're coming home with me? Both of you, tonight." "Never." His hand cracked across her face with enough force to split her lip. "We'll see about that." Maria tasted blood but stood her ground. "Emma, run. Go get help. She's not going anywhere. Jake snarled, turning toward the child. That's when Maria grabbed the cast-iron skillet from the stove and swung it at Jake's head. He ducked, the pan clanging off the cabinet, and backhanded her so hard she fell to the floor. "Run, Emma!" Now, this time the little girl listened. She burst out the front door and ran down Maple Avenue, her bare feet slapping against the cold pavement. She didn't know where she was going, only that she needed help, and the grown-ups always said to find a policeman or go to a public place. The Rusty Chain was the first place she saw, with lights on and people inside. Behind her, she could hear her mother screaming. Tank Rodriguez had heard that scream before, not from a 7-year-old girl, but from his own throat 35 years ago, when his stepfather's belt came down for the 10th time that night. The memory hit him like a sledgehammer as Emma's desperate plea echoed through the smoky bar. He touched the dog tags hanging beneath his leather vest, feeling the worn metal against his chest. Semper Fi, always faithful. The motto meant something different now than it had in Vietnam, but the core remained the same. Protect those who couldn't protect themselves. Boss. Diesel looked up from his pool shot, reading the change in Tank's expression. The room had gone dead quiet, except for the jukebox playing an old Creedence song. Tank studied the little girl standing in their doorway. Her dress was torn at the shoulder, dirt streaked across her face, terror making her whole body shake. She looked exactly like he'd felt that night when he was 8 years old and nobody came to help. "They're hurting my mama," she said again, this time quieter, as if she was starting to doubt whether these scary-looking men would care. The other patrons were staring now. Cobra, with his scarred face and missing left pinky. Hammer, with the prison tattoos covering his neck. Diesel, whose real name nobody remembered anymore. To most people, they looked like exactly the kind of men you'd cross the street to avoid. But Tank knew something the rest of Millbrook didn't. Every man in this room had a story. Every one of them had been broken and rebuilt, lost and found again. Most were veterans who'd served their country and come home to a world that didn't understand them. They'd found family in the brotherhood, purpose in the code they lived by. Rule number 1 of that code: women and children were off limits, always. "Where's your mama, little girl?" Tank's voice was gentler than anyone would expect from a 6'4", 250-pound man with more scars than a road map. "Our house. On Maple Avenue. He's hitting her and breaking things, and she told me to run." Emma wiped her nose on her sleeve. "Are you going to help her?" Tank looked around the room at his brothers. Diesel set down his pool cue. Cobra drained his beer and stood up. Hammer cracked his knuckles. They'd all heard the same thing in her voice that Tank had, a child's absolute terror and desperate hope. "Yeah, sweetheart. We're going to help her." He reached into his pocket and pulled out his keys, the metal jingling in the sudden silence. Behind him, 20 men pushed back their chairs and stood up. Not because they had to, but because that's what family did. Tank knelt down in front of Emma, bringing his massive frame to her eye level. Up close, she could see that his dark eyes were kind, despite the spiderweb tattoo crawling up his neck. "What's your name?" Emma Martinez. "I'm Tank. These are my friends. We're going to make sure nobody hurts your mama ever again. Can you show us where you live?" Emma nodded, suddenly finding courage in this unlikely group of protectors. Tank stood and turned to his crew. They were already grabbing their leather jackets and moving toward the door. No orders needed to be given. They all understood what was happening here. "Diesel, you and Cobra take the back. Hammer, you're with me and the kid. Everyone else, perimeter. Nobody gets in or out until we know what we're dealing with." "What about the cops?" asked Spider, the youngest of the group at 26. "What about them?" Tank's voice carried 30 years of authority. "Little girl needs help right now. We can sort out the paperwork later." He looked down at Emma, who was staring up at him with a mixture of fear and hope that reminded him why he'd gotten into this life in the first place. Not for the reputation or the freedom of the road, but for moments like this, when being the scariest thing in the room meant something. "Ready to ride, little darling?" Emma nodded and reached up to take his enormous, calloused hand in her small one. Outside, 20 Harley-Davidson motorcycles roared to life in perfect synchronization. their engines thundering through the quiet streets of Millbrook like approaching thunder. The convoy of 20 Harley-Davidsons rolled down Main Street like thunder made manifest. Emma sat behind Tank on his custom black and chrome machine, her small arms wrapped around his massive waist, holding on for dear life as they tore through the quiet residential streets of Millbrook. "You're doing great." "Sweetheart!" Tank called over his shoulder, his voice somehow carrying over the roar of engines. Almost there. The sound was unlike anything the sleepy town had ever heard. Porch lights flickered on as residents peered through their windows to see what was happening. Mrs. Henderson dropped her teacup when she saw the procession from her living room window. Old Mr. Jameson actually stepped onto his front porch, mouth agape, as 20 leather-clad riders thundered past his white picket fence. Tank had positioned his men strategically during the ride. Diesel and Cobra would circle around to cover the back of the house. Hammer would stay with the bikes as lookout. The rest would form a perimeter, making sure no one could escape and no innocent bystanders got hurt. Behind Tank, the formation moved with military precision. These weren't just weekend warriors playing biker. Most of them had served together, fought together, bled together in places whose names couldn't be pronounced by the people they'd protected. The coordination came naturally, muscle memory from operations where lives depended on everyone doing their job. Emma pressed her face against Tank's leather vest as they turned onto Maple Avenue. She could smell the familiar scents of motor oil and cigarettes. But underneath it, something else, the clean smell of soap and aftershave that reminded her of her grandfather. The only man who'd ever made her feel truly safe before tonight. "That one," she said, pointing to the small duplex halfway down the block. The blue one with the broken fence. Tank could already hear the shouting from inside. Glass breaking. A woman's voice pleading. The sounds that had haunted his own childhood nightmares for 3 decades. He pulled his bike up to the curb and cut the engine. Behind him, 19 other machines fell silent in perfect unison. The sudden quiet was almost more intimidating than the noise had been. Mrs. Patterson from next door peeked through her curtains, then quickly pulled them shut when she saw the bikers dismounting. Across the street, the Simpson family's dog started barking frantically from their backyard. Tank lifted Emma down from the bike, kneeling to her level again. "You stay right here with Hammer, okay? We're going to take care of this. Is my mama going to be okay?" Emma's voice was small and scared. "She's going to be fine. I promise." Tank had learned not to make promises he couldn't keep, but looking into this little girl's trusting eyes, he knew he'd die before he let any harm come to her or her mother. He signaled to his men, and they moved into position with practiced efficiency. Diesel and Cobra were already at the back of the house. The others formed a loose circle around the property, close enough to help if needed, far enough back to avoid crowding the situation. Through the front window, Tank could see shadows moving inside. A man's silhouette, larger than the woman's, backing her into a corner. The sound of another piece of furniture crashing to the floor. Tank walked up the front steps of the small porch, his heavy boots echoing on the wooden boards. He tried the front door, locked. But locks had never been much of an obstacle for a man who'd kicked down doors in 3 different countries. "Police!" someone shouted from down the street. Tank glanced back to see a squad car approaching, red and blue lights flashing but siren off. "Handle it!" he called to Spider, who jogged over to intercept the officer. Tank turned back to the door. Inside, he could hear Emma's mother crying, begging someone to stop. The sound of a hand striking flesh, that was enough. Tank Rodriguez had been patient long enough. He'd followed protocol, tried to do things the right way. But 35 years of training told him that sometimes you had to act first and sort out the consequences later. He stepped back and drove his boot into the door, just above the lock. The frame splintered with a crack that echoed down the street, and the door swung open to reveal a scene that made his blood boil. Emma's mother was cowering in the corner of the living room, blood trickling from her split lip. Standing over her with a broken beer bottle in his hand was a thin, angry-looking man who reeked of alcohol and rage. Jake Sullivan turned toward the doorway, and his face went white when he saw the mountain of leather and muscle filling the frame. Jake Sullivan's alcohol-clouded brain took several seconds to process what he was seeing. The doorframe filled with a man who looked like he could bench press a small car. Behind Tank, Jake could see more leather-clad figures moving through the shadows of the front yard. "Who the hell are you?" Jake snarled, trying to maintain his bravado even as his grip tightened on the broken bottle. "This is none of your business." Tank stepped into the living room, his presence seeming to fill the entire space. Glass crunched under his boots from the lamp Jake had thrown earlier. Maria pressed herself further into the corner, not sure if these strangers represented salvation or just a different kind of danger. "Name's Tank," he said in a voice that rumbled like distant thunder. "And when a little girl comes crying for help because someone's hurting her mama, that makes it my business." Jake laughed, but there was no humor in it. "One of you against me. I like those odds. One of me." Tank smiled without any warmth reaching his eyes. "Son, you're not fighting one of me. You're fighting all of us." As if on cue, Diesel appeared in the broken doorway behind Tank, followed by Cobra. Through the back door came the sound of more heavy footsteps. As the rest of the crew took their positions, Jake's face went from pale to ashen as he realized he wasn't dealing with a single Good Samaritan but an entire motorcycle club. The broken bottle suddenly felt very small in his trembling hand. "Maria," Tank said without taking his eyes off Jake, "are you hurt bad?" "I'm okay," she whispered, though the blood on her face suggested otherwise. "Just scared." "You don't need to be scared anymore." Tank took another step forward, and Jake raised the bottle defensively. "Stay back." "I'll cut her." "I swear I'll cut her." "No," Tank said with absolute certainty, "you won't." The authority in his voice came from 3 tours in Vietnam, from leading men through jungles where hesitation meant death, from 30 years of knowing exactly when someone was bluffing and when they weren't. Jake was bluffing. "You have 2 choices," Tank continued, his voice calm but carrying the weight of inevitability. "You can put down that bottle and walk out of here with your teeth still in your head. Or you can keep acting stupid and find out what 20 pissed-off Marines think about men who beat women." "I'm not afraid of you," Jake spat, but his voice cracked on the words. "You should be." Through the front window, Jake could see more bikers positioned around the house. They weren't moving, weren't making threats, just standing there like sentinels. But their presence was more intimidating than any verbal threat could have been. Maria found her voice. "Jake, just leave, please. Take whatever you want from here and go." "I want you," he said, swinging his gaze back to her. "I want my family back." "We were never your family," Maria said, finding strength she didn't know she still possessed. "You were just the mistake I made before I learned what real love was supposed to feel like." Jake's face twisted with rage, and he raised the bottle higher. "You ungrateful." Tank moved faster than anyone expected a man his size could move. One moment Jake was threatening Maria with the broken glass. The next, he was face down on the carpet with his arm twisted behind his back and Tank's knee planted firmly between his shoulder blades. The bottle rolled harmlessly across the floor, coming to rest against the overturned coffee table. "That was the wrong choice," Tank said conversationally. Outside, they could hear the police sirens getting closer. Through the window, Tank could see Officer Martinez, no relation to Maria despite the name, climbing out of his patrol car and looking uncertain about how to handle a scene involving 20 bikers. "Diesel," Tank called without looking up, "go talk to the nice policeman. Explain the situation." "Jake Sullivan," Maria said suddenly. "His name is Jake Sullivan. He's my ex-husband. There's a restraining order." Tank nodded. "Hear that, Jake? Restraining order. That means you're in violation just by being here. Never mind the assault and breaking and entering." Jake struggled against Tank's grip, but might as well have been trying to move a mountain. "Let me up. This is assault. Police brutality." "I'm not police," Tank said mildly. "I'm just a concerned citizen making sure you don't hurt anyone else tonight." More sirens were approaching now. Through the broken front door, Tank could see the red and blue lights painting the neighborhood in alternating colors. Tank pulled out his cell phone with his free hand, keeping Jake pinned with his knee. The call connected on the second ring. What's your emergency? This is Marcus Rodriguez at 247 Maple Avenue. We have a domestic violence situation under control. Male suspect is restrained. Female victim needs medical attention. Police are already en route. Sir, are you law enforcement? No, ma'am. Just a concerned citizen who responded to a child's call for help. Tank could hear the confusion in the dispatcher's voice, but he kept his tone professional and calm. 30 years of dealing with military bureaucracy had taught him that the right words in the right tone could diffuse almost any situation. Officer Martinez approached the front door cautiously, his hand resting on his service weapon. Behind him, 2 more patrol cars had arrived, their occupants taking defensive positions behind their vehicles. Everything all right in there? Officer Martinez called through the broken doorway. Yes, sir, Tank replied. Suspect is secured, victim is safe. We're ready to turn this over to you. Diesel appeared beside the officer, his massive frame somehow managing to look non-threatening despite the leather and tattoos. Officer, I'm James Morrison, U.S. Marine Corps veteran. My friend inside served 3 tours in Vietnam. We responded to a child's request for help with an ongoing domestic assault. Officer Martinez studied Diesel's face, noting the calm professionalism in his voice. This wasn't what he'd expected when dispatch told him about 20 bikers at a domestic disturbance. Anyone hurt? Female victim has facial injuries, appears to be assault-related. Male suspect was threatening her with a broken bottle when we arrived. Tank's voice carried from inside the house. Officer, I'm going to release the suspect now. He's been drinking heavily and made threats against the victim. There's an active restraining order. Slowly, Tank removed his knee from Jake's back and stepped away, his hands visible. Jake immediately started screaming, "Arrest them! They broke into my house. They assaulted me!" Officer Martinez stepped through the doorway, taking in the scene. The living room was destroyed, overturned furniture, broken glass, clear signs of a violent struggle that had been going on long before the bikers arrived. "This isn't your house." "Mr. Sullivan," Maria said quietly from her corner. She was holding a dish towel to her bleeding lip, but her voice was steady. "You broke in. You attacked me. This man saved my life." Officer Martinez looked from Jake to Tank to Maria, piecing together what had happened. Behind him, more officers were arriving, but the bikers remained in their positions, non-threatening, but clearly ready to respond if Jake tried anything. "Mom, can you tell me what happened here tonight?" Maria stood up slowly, wincing from bruises that were already forming. "My ex-husband broke down my back door around 8:30. He'd been drinking. He grabbed me, hit me, threatened me with a broken bottle. My daughter ran for help. Where's your daughter now?" "Outside with my friends," Tank said. "She's safe." Officer Martinez pulled out his notebook. "And you are?" "Marcus Rodriguez. These are members of my motorcycle club. The little girl came to our establishment asking for help. We responded. You just happened to be in the neighborhood." Tank met his gaze steadily. "We happen to be human beings who don't ignore a child in distress." Jake struggled to his feet, swaying from alcohol and adrenaline. "I want to press charges. They broke down the door. They assaulted me." "You broke down the door, Jake," Maria said. "They came through the one you broke." Officer Martinez walked to the back of the house, examining the splintered doorframe and the damage Jake had caused getting in. When he returned, his expression had hardened. "Mr. Sullivan, you're under arrest for violation of a restraining order, breaking and entering, assault, and domestic battery." As Officer Martinez read Jake his rights, Cobra knelt beside Maria with a first aid kit from his motorcycle. Despite his fearsome appearance, his touch was gentle as he examined her injuries. "I'm a combat medic," he explained. "These cuts aren't too deep, but you should see a doctor. Possible concussion from that head trauma." Tank watched from across the room as his brother tended to Maria's wounds. Outside, he could hear Emma's voice asking Hammer if her mama was okay. "She's going to be fine, little darling," Hammer's gruff voice replied. "Your mama's tougher than she looks." Officer Martinez finished cuffing Jake and turned to Tank. "I'm going to need statements from all of you." "Of course. We'll cooperate fully," As Jake was led away to the patrol car, he turned back one last time. "This isn't over, Maria. You can't hide behind these freaks forever." Tank stepped forward, his presence alone enough to make Jake stumble backward. "Yes," Tank said quietly, "it is over." By morning, word had spread through Millbrook faster than gossip at a church social. The story grew with each telling. 20 bikers riding to rescue a little girl and her mother, facing down a violent man with nothing but courage and brotherhood. Mrs. Henderson stood at her kitchen window, watching the small duplex across the street where police tape still fluttered in the morning breeze. She'd lived in Millbrook for 63 years and had never seen anything like what happened last night. "Earl," she called to her husband, who was reading the paper at their breakfast table. "I'm going to bake something." "What for?" "For those men who helped that poor woman. It's the least we can do." Earl lowered his newspaper and looked at his wife over his reading glasses. "You mean the bikers?" "Martha, we don't even know those people. We know they risked themselves to help a neighbor in trouble." "That's enough." An hour later, Martha Henderson walked across Maple Avenue, carrying her grandmother's apple pie and wearing her best Sunday dress. She'd never spoken to Maria Martinez beyond polite nods in the grocery store, but some things transcended social barriers. Maria answered the door with a bandaged cheek and a black eye that made Martha's heart ache. Behind her, the living room was still in shambles from the night before. Mrs. Henderson. "Dear, I brought you a pie." "And I wanted to apologize." "Apologize? For what?" Martha looked down at her sensible shoes, ashamed. "For not knowing you needed help. For not being a better neighbor. For judging those men who came to your aid without knowing their hearts." Maria's eyes filled with tears. "Please, come in." They sat in the kitchen, the only room that hadn't been destroyed, drinking coffee and talking like old friends. Martha learned about Maria's struggles as a single mother, her fear of Jake finding them, her gratitude for the unexpected angels who'd appeared in leather and denim. "Where are they now?" Martha asked. "The bikers." "Mr. Rodriguez said they'd be staying in town for a few days, making sure Jake doesn't make bail and cause more trouble. Emma's been asking to see them. Emma's a brave little girl. She gets that from her grandmother. My mother always said courage isn't the absence of fear, it's doing what's right despite being afraid." Around noon, the rumble of motorcycles echoed down Maple Avenue again. But this time the sound didn't bring fear, it brought relief. Tank and 3 of his men pulled up to the curb, their presence now a symbol of protection rather than threat. Martha Henderson watched from Maria's kitchen window as neighbors emerged from their houses. Not to gawk or whisper, but to wave. Mr. Jameson actually walked over to shake Tank's hand. Mrs. Patterson from next door brought out a pitcher of iced tea. "Would you look at that?" Martha murmured. Emma ran out of the house and straight into Tank's arms, her small body dwarfed by his massive frame. He lifted her up like she weighed nothing, and she wrapped her arms around his neck with complete trust. "Tank, you came back." "Course I did, little darling. Had to make sure you and your mama were okay." Other children began gathering, drawn by curiosity and their parents' relaxed attitudes. The fearsome bikers that Millbrook had whispered about for years were suddenly signing autographs and answering questions about their motorcycles. "Can I sit on it?" asked Tommy Simpson, age 9. "Ask your mom first," Tank replied, then lifted the boy onto the seat when Mrs. Simpson nodded her approval. Diesel was showing a group of teenagers the custom paint job on his bike, explaining how he'd done the flames himself. Cobra had somehow acquired a stray cat that was now purring contentedly in his arms while he scratched behind its ears. "They're not what I expected," Martha admitted to Maria. "They're exactly what Emma and I needed," Maria replied. As the afternoon wore on, more neighbors joined the impromptu gathering. Someone brought folding chairs. Someone else fired up a grill. What had started as a welfare check was turning into a block party. Tank found himself sitting on Maria's front steps. Emma curled up beside him as he told her sanitized stories about his travels across the country. The children gathered around, eyes wide with wonder at tales of mountains and deserts and cities they'd only seen in pictures. "Have you ever been scared?" Emma asked, Tank considered the question seriously, many times. But you know what I learned? Being scared doesn't make you weak. It makes you human. And sometimes scared people do the bravest things of all. Martha Henderson walked over with a slice of apple pie on a paper plate. Mr. Rodriguez, I wanted to thank you properly. Tank accepted the pie with a smile that transformed his entire face. Ma'am, this is very kind, but we didn't do anything special. We just did what anyone should do. That's what makes it special, Martha replied. 3 days after the rescue, Maria sat at her kitchen table watching Emma color at the breakfast nook. The little girl had barely left her crayons alone since Tank's visit, working furiously on what she called her thank you picture. What are you drawing, mija? Maria asked, though she could already see the rough outlines taking shape. It's Tank and Diesel and Cobra and all of them, Emma said without looking up from her work. But they're superheroes. Maria leaned over to get a better look. Emma had drawn Tank with a cape flowing behind him, his motorcycle transformed into some kind of flying machine. The other bikers surrounded him with their own capes and heroic poses, all of them smiling under their helmets. They saved us, so they're superheroes, Emma explained matter-of-factly. Like Batman, but with motorcycles instead of a car. That's a beautiful way to think about it. The knock on the front door made Maria tense. She was still jumpy about unexpected visitors. But through the peephole, she saw Tank's familiar silhouette and felt her shoulders relax. Tank! Emma abandoned her crayons and ran to the door. Maria opened it to find Tank holding a small bag from the hardware store and wearing an expression that was somehow both shy and determined. Hope I'm not intruding. Thought I might fix that back door frame if you don't mind. You don't have to do that. Want to. Besides, a house should feel safe, especially for Emma. Maria stepped aside to let him in. Tank filled the doorway and most of the kitchen. But somehow his presence made the small space feel more secure rather than cramped. I brought you something, Emma announced, holding up her drawing. Tank knelt down to her level and studied the artwork with the seriousness it deserved. This is incredible, little darling. Is that really how you see us? Uh-huh. You're the good guys now. Now? Emma tilted her head thoughtfully. Well, maybe you were always good guys and people just couldn't see it because they were scared of your motorcycles and your tattoos. Tank glanced at Maria, who was watching the exchange with a soft smile. Emma's very wise for 7 years old. She gets that from her grandmother. My mother always said people are more than what they appear to be on the surface. Tank began working on the door frame, his movements precise and careful despite his large hands. Maria found herself studying him as he worked, the concentration on his face, the way he checked and double-checked each measurement. You're good at this, she observed. Had to be. Grew up fixing things that broke in our house. My stepfather had a talent for breaking things when he got angry. Maria understood the weight behind those words. Is that why you helped us? Because you understood. Tank paused in his work, considering how much to share. Partly, but mostly because it was the right thing to do. Emma's a brave little girl. She deserved someone to believe her and act on it. She's been sleeping through the night for the first time in months, Maria said quietly. Ever since you and your friends showed up, she feels safe again. Good. Kids should feel safe in their own homes. Emma appeared beside Tank with a glass of water. Are you thirsty? Mama says working hard makes people thirsty. Thank you, sweetheart. Tank accepted the water and drank it with exaggerated appreciation. Best water I've ever had. Emma giggled, the sound filling the kitchen with warmth. As Tank continued working, Maria found herself really looking at him for the first time. Without the crisis and adrenaline, she could see past the intimidating exterior to the gentle man underneath. The way he spoke softly to Emma, how he'd insisted on fixing her door, the careful way he treated everything in her home. Tank, can I ask you something? Sure. Why aren't you married? You're good with children, you're kind, you're protective. Tank's hands stilled on his tools. Never found the right person, I guess. The lifestyle doesn't exactly attract the kind of woman who wants a quiet life with kids and a white picket fence. Maybe you've been looking in the wrong places. Their eyes met across the kitchen, and something passed between them, an understanding, a possibility that neither had expected to find. "Mama," Emma said, breaking the moment, "can Tank stay for dinner? I want to show him my room and my stuffed animals." Maria felt her cheeks warm. "If he wants to. I'm not much of a cook, but I'd like that very much," Tank said quietly. "I've been eating diner food for 3 days. A home-cooked meal sounds perfect." As the afternoon sunlight streamed through the kitchen window, Maria began to think that maybe, just maybe, something beautiful could grow from the ashes of her old life. That evening, at the Rusty Chain, Tank sat with his inner circle around their usual table in the back corner. The bar felt different now, lighter somehow, as if helping Emma and Maria had lifted a weight none of them realized they'd been carrying. "So, what's the story, boss?" Diesel asked, nursing his beer. "We staying in Millbrook or moving on?" Tank considered the question while watching Cobra feed peanuts to the stray cat that had apparently adopted him. "What do you all think of this place?" "Better than I expected," Hammer admitted. "People here got substance once you get past the surface. Reminds me of the town I grew up in," Spider added. "Before everything went to hell." Tank nodded slowly. They'd been drifting for months, moving from town to town with no real destination in mind. Maybe it was time to consider putting down roots. "Diesel, tell them about your conversation with that mechanic today." Diesel straightened up. "Guy who owns the garage on Main Street, Tom Morrison. Turns out he's short-handed. Needs someone who knows their way around engines. Asked if any of us were looking for work." "Legitimate work?" Cobra asked, scratching the cat behind its ears. "As legitimate as it gets. Fixing cars, changing oil, general maintenance. Nothing exciting, but steady pay, and he doesn't care about our backgrounds as long as we show up and do the job." Tank pulled out his wallet and removed a worn photograph, a Purple Heart medal lying on a faded military citation. "Any of you ever wonder what we're really doing out here? Riding from place to place, never staying long enough to matter?" The question hung in the air. These men had been his family for years, following him across half the country as they searched for something none of them could quite name. "I joined this club after 3 tours in Afghanistan," Hammer said quietly. "Couldn't figure out how to be a civilian. Everything felt pointless after what we'd seen." "Same," Spider nodded. 2 deployments in Iraq. Came home and couldn't relate to anyone who hadn't been there." Cobra set down his beer. "You all know my story. Prison for 8 years on a charge that was bullshit. But I couldn't afford a lawyer who cared. Got out and nobody would hire an ex-con, even one with an honorable discharge." Tank looked around the table at these men who'd become his brothers, each one carrying scars, visible and invisible, from lives that had started one way and been bent into something else by circumstances beyond their control. "We've all been running from something," Tank said. "But maybe what happened with Emma and Maria, maybe that's what we've been running toward." "You mean settling down?" "Here," Diesel asked. "I mean finding purpose again. Being part of something bigger than ourselves. When was the last time any of you felt like what you did actually mattered?" The silence that followed was filled with understanding. They'd all felt it. That moment when Emma ran to Tank for protection. When the community looked at them with gratitude instead of fear. When they'd been heroes instead of outlaws. "There's something else," Tank continued. "Morrison's not the only one offering work. Mrs. Patterson asked if anyone wanted to help with her landscaping business. Says she needs people who aren't afraid of hard work and who know how to handle themselves if trouble comes around." "You've been busy," Cobra observed. "People are starting to see us differently. We could build something here, something real." Hammer leaned back in his chair. "What about our reputation? We've got enemies in other places. People who might come looking for us." "Let them come," Tank said with quiet confidence. "We're not the same men we were when we started this journey. And we're not alone anymore." Through the bar's front window, they could see families walking down Main Street, children playing in the early evening light, normal people living normal lives in a place that was starting to feel like home. "I vote we stay," Spider said suddenly. "At least for a while." "See what happens." "Seconded," Diesel agreed. One by one, the others nodded their agreement. Even Cobra, who'd been the most skeptical about putting down roots, seemed convinced. "Then it's settled," Tank said. "We make Millbrook our home base. We get jobs, we become part of the community, and we see what kind of life we can build here." As if summoned by their decision, the bar door opened, and Maria walked in with Emma beside her. The little girl was carrying her superhero drawing, carefully protected in a plastic folder. "Tank!" Emma called out, running toward their table. "I brought you my picture." Tank stood and lifted her up, accepting the drawing with appropriate ceremony. "This is going right up on our wall, little darling. Place of honor." As Maria approached more cautiously, Tank realized that staying in Millbrook wasn't just about his brotherhood finding purpose. It was about the possibility of finding something he'd never thought he deserved, a real family to protect and love. 2 weeks later, the Millbrook Community Center buzzed with activity that hadn't been seen in years. Folding tables lined the main hall, covered with handmade signs advertising everything from bake sales to car washes. At the center of it all stood a large poster board with bold letters, "Benefit Concert for Millbrook Women's Shelter, sponsored by the Iron Brotherhood MC." Tank stood behind the registration table, wearing his leather vest over a clean white t-shirt, helping Mrs. Henderson organize volunteer schedules. The sight of the feared biker leader coordinating with the church ladies would have been unthinkable a month ago. "The local radio station wants to interview you about the benefit," Mrs. Henderson informed him, checking items off her clipboard. "And the regional newspaper is sending a photographer. We don't need publicity," Tank replied. "We just want to help. Sometimes the best way to help is to let people know that help exists." Across the hall, Diesel was setting up sound equipment with the enthusiasm of someone who'd found his calling. Before prison, he'd been a sound engineer for small venues. The skills came back easily, and his face lit up every time he solved a technical problem. "Testing, testing!" His voice boomed through the speakers before he quickly adjusted the levels. "Sorry about that, folks." Emma sat cross-legged on the floor nearby, watching Diesel work with fascination. She'd become something of a mascot for the Iron Brotherhood, and Tank noticed how his men's rough edges seemed to soften whenever she was around. "Why do you have so many tattoos?" Emma asked Diesel during a quiet moment. "Well, little darling," Diesel knelt down to her level, "each one tells a story. This one here is for my unit in the army, this one's for my hometown, and this one," he pointed to a small heart on his wrist, "is for my daughter. Where's your daughter?" Diesel's expression grew sad. "She lives far away with her mama. I made some mistakes, and now I only get to see her sometimes." Emma considered this with the seriousness that children bring to adult problems. "Maybe if you stay in one place long enough. She could come visit you here. Maybe she could," Diesel agreed, surprised by the hope that suddenly bloomed in his chest. Across the room, Maria worked with a group of local women organizing donated items for auction. She'd thrown herself into the benefit planning with the determination of someone who understood exactly what the women's shelter meant to families in crisis. "This is wonderful," said Janet Walsh, the shelter director. "We haven't had community support like this in years." "Sometimes it takes an outside perspective to show people what's been there all along," Maria replied. Arranging homemade quilts on display tables, Tank watched Maria work, noting how she'd grown more confident over the past 2 weeks. The bruises on her face had faded, but more importantly, the fear in her eyes had been replaced by something stronger: purpose. "You're staring," Cobra observed, appearing beside Tank with the stray cat draped over his shoulders like a living scarf. "Just thinking about Maria." Tank didn't deny it. "About how strange life is. A month ago, if someone had told me I'd be organizing charity events and thinking about settling down, I'd have laughed in their face. Maybe this is who you were always supposed to be. Maybe the rest was just getting here." The front doors opened, and Chief of Police Williams entered with 2 other officers. Tank tensed automatically, old habits from years of viewing law enforcement as the enemy. But Williams approached with his hand extended for a handshake. "Rodriguez, hell of a thing you've put together here. Community effort, Chief. We're just lending a hand. About that job Morrison offered your man Diesel. I hear he's working out well at the garage. Diesel's a good man. Just needed a chance to prove it. Chief Williams nodded. We've got some other opportunities opening up. City maintenance, construction projects. If any of your other men are interested in steady work. Tank felt something shift inside his chest, the feeling of doors opening instead of closing, of possibilities instead of dead ends. I'll pass that along. And Chief, thanks for giving us a chance. You earned it. As the afternoon wore on, the community center filled with families, couples, elderly residents, and teenagers. The same people who once crossed the street to avoid the Iron Brotherhood now worked alongside them, sharing stories and laughter. Emma found Tank during a quiet moment, tugging on his vest to get his attention. Tank, are you happy now? What do you mean, little darling? Before, when you were sad and angry all the time, are you happy now? Tank picked her up, settling her on his hip as he looked out over the bustling room. Yeah, Emma, I think I am. Good. Mama says everyone deserves to be happy, even if it takes a long time to find it. Your mama's a smart woman. I know. That's why you should marry her. Tank nearly choked on his surprise. Emma, she likes you. I can tell. And you like her too. And I already drew you in my family picture, so it would work out perfect. Sometimes, Tank thought, the wisdom of children cuts straight through all the complicated adult fears and excuses to the simple truth underneath. The benefit concert had been a success beyond anyone's expectations, raising enough money to keep the women's shelter operating for 6 months. Tank felt a satisfaction he hadn't experienced. Since his military days, the deep contentment that came from accomplishing something meaningful, which made the letter waiting in his mailbox even more jarring. Maria found him, sitting on his apartment steps the next morning, holding a crumpled piece of paper and staring at nothing. His usual calm demeanor had been replaced by something darker, more familiar, the dangerous stillness she remembered from their first meeting. Tank? What's wrong? He looked up at her, and she saw a flash of the man who'd kicked down doors in Vietnam, who'd lived by violence for so long that peace felt unnatural. Jake made bail. The words hit Maria like a physical blow. She sat down beside Tank on the concrete steps, her hands trembling as she reached for the letter. How? His bail was set at $50,000. Says here, his cousin put up his house as collateral. Jake's been in county lockup for 3 weeks, plenty of time to make plans and nurse grudges. Maria read the official notification with growing dread. Jake would be released tomorrow pending his trial date, which wasn't scheduled for another 2 months. 2 months of looking over her shoulder, of being afraid every time Emma played outside. There's more, Tank said quietly. This came with it. He handed her a second piece of paper, not official correspondence this time, but a handwritten note on lined notebook paper. You think your biker boyfriends can protect you forever? I've got friends too. Real friends who know how to handle problems. See you soon, Maria, both of you. Maria's blood went cold. He's threatening Emma. Yeah, he is. Tank's voice carried a deadly calm that Maria had never heard before. This wasn't the gentleman who fixed her door or played with her daughter. This was someone else entirely, someone capable of terrible things. What do? We keep you and Emma safe, whatever it takes. That afternoon, Tank called an emergency meeting at the Rusty Chain. His brotherhood gathered around their usual table, but the relaxed atmosphere of recent weeks had evaporated. These men looked like what they'd always been underneath, warriors who'd seen too much combat to be shocked by threats. Jake Sullivan's getting out tomorrow, Tank announced without preamble. And he's made it clear he intends to hurt Maria and Emma. Hammer cracked his knuckles. So we handle it. Guy like that doesn't understand anything but violence anyway. Can't do that, Tank said, though part of him wanted to agree. We're not those men anymore. We've got a place in this community now, responsibilities. So what then? Diesel asked. We just wait for him to make his move. We protect them legally. Round the clock watch. Make sure he can't get near them without witnesses. Spider leaned forward. Boss, you know as well as I do that guys like Jake don't give up. He'll keep coming until someone stops him permanently. Tank felt the familiar weight of command decisions settling on his shoulders. In combat, the choices had been clearer. Kill or be killed, protect your unit at all costs. Civilian life required more nuanced thinking, but when it came to Emma's safety, the calculations became simple again. "There's something else," Tank continued. The note mentioned friends. "Jake's been in county lockup with some serious criminals. If he's made alliances in there, then we're not just dealing with one drunk asshole," Cobra finished. "We're dealing with organized trouble," Tank nodded grimly. "I called Chief Williams. He's increasing patrols around Maria's house and Emma's school. But police can't be everywhere." The bar fell silent except for the distant sound of pool balls clicking in the front room. Each man was thinking the same thing. They'd found peace in Millbrook, but peace was a fragile thing when threatened by violence. "What's the plan?" Diesel asked finally. "Shifts. 2 men with Maria and Emma at all times. Subtle but present. If Jake or anyone else wants to get to them, they'll have to go through us. And if they try..." Tank's expression hardened. "Then we remind them why people used to cross the street when they saw us coming." As the meeting broke up, Tank remained at the table, staring at Jake's threatening note. He'd spent 3 weeks building a new life, believing he could put the violence behind him. But some ghosts refused to stay buried. His phone buzzed with a text from Maria. "Emma's asking if you're coming to dinner tonight." "She made you a drawing," Tank typed back. "On my way." "And Maria? Pack a bag for both of you. You're staying somewhere safe until this is over." Outside, storm clouds were gathering over Millbrook, and Tank couldn't shake the feeling that the real test of their transformation was just beginning. The sound of shattering glass at 2 in the morning brought Tank instantly awake. He'd been sleeping on Maria's couch for 3 nights now, and his combat instincts kicked in before his conscious mind fully processed what was happening. "Stay down," he whispered urgently to Maria and Emma, who had emerged from the bedroom at the sound. Tank moved to the front window, staying low and to the side. A black pickup truck was speeding away down Maple Avenue, its license plate obscured by mud. On the front lawn, scattered among the glass fragments from Maria's living room window, lay a brick wrapped in paper. "Are they gone?" Maria asked, her voice tight with fear. "For now." Tank carefully picked up the brick and unwrapped the message. The words were scrawled in the same handwriting as Jake's earlier threat. "This is just the beginning. Next time won't be a warning." Emma pressed herself against her mother's side, tears streaming down her face. "Why are the bad men trying to hurt us again?" "Because some people don't know how to let go of their anger," Tank said gently, kneeling down to her level. "But remember what we talked about? Sometimes good people have to stand up to bullies." Within minutes, police sirens wailed down the street. Chief Williams arrived with 2 patrol cars, their red and blue lights painting the neighborhood in urgent colors. Neighbors emerged from their houses in robes and pajamas, concern replacing their initial alarm when they saw Tank's motorcycle parked outside. "Third incident this week," Chief Williams said as he examined the broken window. "Drive by at the diner where Maria works. Slash tires on your bike, now this." "Jake's escalating," Tank replied. "Testing our responses, seeing how far he can push before we push back. Any idea who his friends might be?" "I made some calls. Jake shared a cell with Tommy Brennan for 2 weeks. Brennan's got connections to some rough people in the city, drug dealers, muscle for hire." Chief Williams frowned. "Brennan's bad news. If he's involved, this isn't just about domestic revenge anymore. This is professional intimidation." As they spoke, Tank noticed movement in the shadows across the street. A figure quickly ducked behind a parked car when he looked in that direction. "Chief, we've got eyes on us right now." Williams followed Tank's gaze and quietly radioed for backup. "All units, we need a perimeter around Maple Avenue. Possible surveillance in progress, but by the time additional officers arrived, whoever had been watching was gone." Back inside the house, Maria swept up glass while Tank boarded up the broken window with plywood. Emma sat at the kitchen table, methodically tearing her superhero drawing into tiny pieces. "Emma, what are you doing?" Maria asked, noticing her daughter's unusual behavior. "The superheroes didn't work," Emma said matter-of-factly. "The bad men came anyway." Tank stopped hammering and looked at the little girl, whose faith in heroes was crumbling before his eyes. This was exactly what Jake wanted, to terrorize them, to make them feel helpless and afraid. "Emma, can I tell you something important?" She nodded, though she didn't look up from destroying her artwork. Real superheroes don't stop all the bad things from happening. They help people be brave when bad things do happen, and they make sure the bad guys don't win in the end. But I'm scared. Being scared is okay. I'm scared too sometimes. But you know what makes me brave? Emma finally looked at him. What? Knowing that I won't let anything happen to you or your mama. Even if I have to be scary myself to protect you. Maria felt a chill at the underlying promise in Tank's words. She could see the internal war he was fighting, between the peaceful man he'd been trying to become and the warrior he'd always been underneath. Later that night, after Emma had finally fallen asleep in her mother's arms, Tank sat on the front porch with Diesel and Hammer. The street was quiet, except for the occasional patrol car making its rounds. "This is getting out of hand," Diesel said quietly. "They're not going to stop with broken windows and intimidation." "I know," Tank replied. "So what's the play?" "We can't just keep playing defense forever." Tank was quiet for a long moment, weighing his options. "Tomorrow I'm going to have a conversation with Jake, man to man." "Bad idea, boss. You'll be walking into a trap. Maybe, but this ends one way or another. I won't have Emma living in fear because I was too civilized to do what needs doing." In the distance, a motorcycle engine roared to life and faded away into the night. Tank couldn't tell if it was one of his men making rounds or someone else entirely, and that uncertainty was eating at him. The transformation from outlaw to protector was proving more complicated than he'd imagined. Tank sat alone in his apartment at 4 in the morning. An old military manual open on the table before him. The pages were dog-eared and stained, marked with notes from a younger man who'd learned to kill efficiently and without hesitation. Rules of engagement, acceptable targets, collateral damage assessment. He'd been staring at the same page for an hour, wrestling with demons he thought he'd put to rest. The manual had been his Bible in Vietnam, a guide to surviving in a world where split-second decisions meant the difference between coming home and coming home in a box. But those rules had been written for war zones, not for protecting a 7-year-old girl in small-town America. His phone buzzed. A text from Maria. "Can't sleep. Emma keeps asking if the bad men are coming back." Tank closed the manual and walked to his window. Across town, he could see the lights still on in Maria's house, where Cobra was pulling the night watch. His brotherhood had responded without question when he'd asked them to protect what mattered most to him, but he could see the strain wearing on all of them. They weren't young men anymore. The constant vigilance, the hyper-alertness, the sleeping in shifts. It was taking them back to a mindset they'd spent years trying to escape. Another text from Maria. "Tank, I need to tell you something. I can't let you destroy yourself trying to save us." Tank grabbed his keys and rode through the empty streets to Maria's house. He found her sitting on the front porch steps, wrapped in a blanket, staring at the plywood covering her broken window. "You should be inside," he said, settling beside her. "I needed air, needed to think." "About what?" Maria turned to face him, and in the dim porch light, Tank could see the exhaustion in her eyes. "About what this is doing to you. To all of you. We're fine. No, you're not. You're becoming someone else again. Someone harder. I can see it happening." Tank wanted to deny it, but the weight of the military manual in his jacket pocket seemed to mock any attempt at dishonesty. Jake and his friends. "They're not going to stop," Maria continued. "And the longer this goes on, the more you're going to feel like you have to handle it the old way. The old way gets results. The old way destroys souls." Tank stared out at the quiet street, remembering nights in Vietnam when the silence meant either safety or an imminent attack. The uncertainty had been maddening then, and it was maddening now. "What are you saying, Maria?" "I'm saying maybe Emma and I should leave Millbrook. Go somewhere Jake can't find us. The words hit Tank like a physical blow. Run away? Start over again? It's what I know how to do, and it would end this before it turns you back into someone you don't want to be, Tank felt. Something dangerous rising in his chest, the cold calculation that had kept him alive in the jungle but had nearly destroyed his humanity. Running won't solve anything. Jake will just follow, or he'll find someone else to terrorize. Then what's the answer? Tank pulled out the manual and set it on the step between them. This book taught me how to win wars, how to eliminate threats permanently, how to make sure the enemy never gets a second chance to hurt innocent people. Maria stared at the worn military manual, understanding immediately what it represented. And is that what you want to do? Eliminate Jake? Part of me does. The part that remembers what it feels like to be 8 years old and helpless while someone hurts the people you love. They sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of the decision pressing down on both of them. In the distance, a police siren wailed, some other emergency in their normally peaceful town. There's another way, Maria said finally. What? We trust the system. We trust Chief Williams and the law to handle this properly. Tank laughed bitterly. The system that let Jake make bail? The system that can't protect you from drive-by attacks? The system that gave you and your brothers a second chance? The system that let us build something good here? Tank picked up the manual, feeling its familiar weight. What if the system fails? Then we'll face that when it happens. But Tank, if you go back to being what you used to be, even to protect us, you'll lose yourself. And Emma will lose the man who showed her what real heroes look like. As dawn began to break over Millbrook, Tank realized he was standing at the most important crossroads of his life. The choice wasn't just about how to handle Jake Sullivan, it was about who he wanted to be for the rest of his days. The manual felt heavier in his hands than it ever had in Vietnam. Chief Williams spread the surveillance. Photos across his desk, his expression grim. Tank studied the black and white images. Jake Sullivan meeting with 3 men outside a warehouse on the outskirts of town. Money changing hands. Weapons visible in the back of a pickup truck. We've been watching Jake's movements since he made bail, Williams explained. These photos were taken yesterday. The man on the left is Tommy Brennan, the one from county lockup. The other 2 are brothers from the city, muscle for hire, with records going back 15 years. Tank recognized the type immediately. Not passionate criminals driven by emotion, but professionals who hurt people for money. The kind who wouldn't hesitate to target a child if the price was right. What's the plan? Tank asked. Williams looked uncomfortable. That's where things get complicated. We don't have enough evidence for arrests. Meeting with known criminals isn't illegal. And we can't prove they're planning anything specific. So we wait until they actually hurt someone, or we get them to incriminate themselves. Tank understood immediately. You want to set a trap. I want to give them an opportunity to commit crimes we can prove in court. With proper evidence and witnesses, Williams pulled out a small electronic device, a wire transmitter disguised as a button on a shirt. State police use these for undercover operations. High-quality audio recording, range of half a mile. You want me to wear a wire? I want you to do what you were probably planning to do anyway, confront Jake directly. But this time, we'll be listening. If he threatens you, if he admits to the attacks, if he reveals plans to hurt Maria and Emma, we'll have him on tape. Tank picked up the device, surprised by how small it was. In Vietnam, intelligence gathering had been more direct. Capture someone and make them talk. This felt more civilized, but also more uncertain. What about his backup? The professionals? That's where your brotherhood comes in. We position them around the meeting site, but they're also wearing wires. If Jake's friends show up armed, we'll have multiple recordings of conspiracy charges. Tank considered the plan. It appealed to his tactical mind, using the enemy's aggression against them, turning their threats into evidence. But it also meant putting his men at risk. Where do we do this? Jake's been staying at the Riverside Motel on Route 9. Runs down, isolated, perfect for a private conversation. We'll have unmarked units positioned nearby, close enough to respond, but far enough away to avoid detection. Tank nodded slowly. It was a good plan, But like all good plans, it depended on variables they couldn't control. When? Tomorrow night. We've got intel that Jake's meeting with his hired muscle tomorrow afternoon, probably to finalize whatever they're planning. If we move the next evening, we can catch them before they have a chance to act. Williams handed Tank a folder containing maps of the motel and surrounding area. Study these tonight. Plan your approach, your exit routes, where you want your men positioned. Chief, if this goes sideways, it won't. And if it does, we'll be ready. Tank left the police station feeling something he hadn't experienced in weeks, purpose mixed with apprehension. The familiar pre-mission tension that had once kept him alive in hostile territory. That evening, he called a meeting at the Rusty Chain. His brotherhood gathered around their usual table, but this time they were joined by Maria. Tank had insisted she be part of the planning. This was her life. Her daughter's safety at stake. Tomorrow night, we end this, Tank announced. But we do it legally, with police support and proper evidence. He outlined the plan, watching his men's faces as they processed the details. These were veterans who understood tactical operations, who knew the difference between a calculated risk and a suicide mission. I don't like it, Hammer said bluntly. Too many unknowns. What if Jake doesn't take the bait? What if his friends are smarter than we think? Then we try something else, Tank replied. But this gives us the best chance of stopping them without anyone getting hurt. Diesel leaned forward. What about Emma? Where's she during all this?
Safe house, Maria answered.
Chief Williams is arranging protection for her with social services. She'll be with the trained family in another county until this is over. Tank watched Maria's face as she spoke about sending her daughter away, even temporarily. The pain was evident, but so was her determination to keep Emma safe. Everyone understand their positions, Tank asked. His men nodded, their faces showing the same focused intensity he remembered from pre-mission briefings 30 years ago. Good. Tomorrow night, we find out if Jake Sullivan is stupid enough to confess his crimes to a room full of recording devices. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance, promising a storm that would match the tension building in all their hearts. The Riverside Motel looked exactly like the kind of place where bad decisions went to die. Tank pulled his Harley into the gravel parking lot, the rumble of his engine echoing off the single-story building's faded concrete walls. Room 237, Jake's room according to police surveillance, was at the far end, its curtains drawn tight against the evening light. Tank touched the wire hidden beneath his leather vest, feeling the small device that would either end this nightmare or escalate it beyond repair. Through his earpiece, Chief Williams' voice crackled softly. All units in position. Rodriguez, you're green to approach. Tank could feel his brotherhood positioned around the motel's perimeter. Diesel at the north exit, Hammer watching the back parking lot, Cobra covering the main road. Each of them also wore recording devices, turning the entire operation into a web of electronic surveillance. He knocked on Jake's door with the authority of a man who'd kicked down doors in 3 different countries. The sound echoed in the humid evening air. Jake Sullivan, we need to talk. Footsteps moved inside the room, followed by the sound of a chain being removed. The door opened to reveal Jake, looking thinner and meaner than Tank remembered. His eyes darted nervously past Tank to scan the parking lot. Well, the famous Tank Rodriguez. Come to threaten me again? Come to give you a chance to end this before it gets worse. Jake laughed and stepped aside, gesturing Tank into the shabby motel room. The space reeked of cigarettes and cheap whiskey. On the bed lay several photographs, pictures of Emma walking to school, Maria leaving work. Tank himself outside his apartment. You've been busy, Tank observed, keeping his voice steady despite the rage building in his chest, just keeping track of my investments. See, Maria and Emma belong to me, always have. And you're just an obstacle that needs removing. Tank positioned himself near the window, knowing the police needed clear audio. Is that a threat, Jake? It's a promise. You think you and your biker buddies scare me? I've got real professionals working for me now. Men who solve problems permanently. Through the thin motel walls, Tank could hear movement in the adjacent rooms. Jake's backup was close, probably listening to every word. What kind of problems are we talking about? Jake picked up one of the photographs, Emma smiling as she played in her school's playground. The kind where little girls have accidents, where houses catch fire in the middle of the night, where bikers disappear and nobody asks questions. Tank's military training kept his expression neutral, but inside, the warrior was awakening. This wasn't just criminal behavior, this was evil, pure and simple. You're talking about murdering a child. I'm talking about taking back what's mine. Maria will come home once she realizes what happens to people who help her run away. Jake moved to the nightstand and pulled out a revolver, setting it casually on the table between them. Tommy Brennan says killing bikers sends a message to other troublemakers. Two birds, one stone. Brennan's here. Oh, he's here, along with the Morrison brothers. 3 professionals against 1 aging veteran. I like those odds. Tank heard the soft click of his wire, transmitting Jake's confession to the police units surrounding the motel. Everything they needed for conviction was now on tape. You're making a mistake. Jake. No, the mistake was letting you live this long. Jake reached for the gun, his movements clumsy from alcohol and overconfidence. But Tank had been expecting this moment, had seen it coming since the first threatening letter. Tank moved with the fluid precision of a man who'd survived combat by being faster and smarter than his enemies. His hand closed over Jake's wrist before the gun cleared the table, twisting with just enough force to make Jake cry out and release his grip. The revolver clattered to the floor as Tank spun Jake around and pressed him against the wall. His forearm across Jake's throat. Jake Sullivan, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, making terroristic threats, and violation of a restraining order. You're not a cop. No, but they are. The motel room door burst open as Chief Williams and 4 officers flooded in, weapons drawn. Through the walls, Tank could hear similar commotion as police arrested Jake's hired muscle in the adjacent rooms. We got it all on tape, Williams said, securing Jake's hands with cuffs. Threats against Maria, Emma, and you. Conspiracy charges that'll put him away for 20 years minimum. Jake's face twisted with rage and disbelief. This is entrapment. You can't use recordings made without my permission. Actually, we can, Williams replied. Especially when you're threatening to murder a child, as they led Jake away. Tank stood in the doorway of the motel room, feeling something he hadn't experienced in months, complete certainty that justice had been served properly. His leather vest, bearing the patches that told his life story, had never felt more meaningful than in this moment when he'd chosen law over vengeance. 3 weeks later, Mayor Patricia Wells stood at the podium in Millbrook's town square, holding an official proclamation that would have seemed impossible just 2 months earlier. The autumn sun cast golden light over the gathered crowd. Families, business owners, elderly residents, and children who'd come to witness something unprecedented in their town's history. Citizens of Millbrook, Mayor Wells began, her voice carrying across the square through borrowed speakers. We gather today to recognize extraordinary acts of courage and community service. Tank stood with his brotherhood near the gazebo, uncomfortable. Table with the attention but understanding its importance. Beside him, Maria held Emma's hand, both of them wearing their best dresses for the occasion. The little girl kept looking up at Tank with uncontainable excitement. The Iron Brotherhood Motorcycle Club came to our community as strangers, the mayor continued. Many of us viewed them with suspicion, even fear. But when a child cried out for help, these men answered that call without hesitation. Chief Williams approached the microphone next, his usually stern expression softened by genuine respect. In 30 years of law enforcement, I've rarely seen civilians show the courage and restraint demonstrated by Marcus Rodriguez and his associates. They could have handled this situation through violence, but they chose justice. They could have sought revenge, but they sought truth. The chief gestured toward Tank. Mr. Rodriguez, would you and your men please step forward? Tank felt the familiar weight of responsibility as he led his brotherhood to the front of the gathering. Diesel, Cobra, Hammer, Spider, and the others arranged themselves in a line. their leather vests and tattoos somehow looking dignified in the afternoon light. "By the authority vested in me by the state of Indiana and the citizens of Millbrook," Mayor Wells announced, "I hereby declare the members of the Iron Brotherhood Motorcycle Club to be official heroes of our community." The applause started slowly, but built to a thunderous crescendo. Tank saw Mrs. Henderson wiping tears from her eyes, Mr. Jameson clapping enthusiastically, children cheering and pointing at their unlikely heroes. "Furthermore," the mayor continued, "I present you with the keys to our city, along with our eternal gratitude for showing us that heroism comes in many forms." Tank accepted the ceremonial key, a simple brass object that felt heavier than any medal he'd received in Vietnam. He looked out over the crowd and saw faces that had transformed from fearful to accepting to genuinely welcoming. "Thank you," Tank said, his voice carrying easily across the square without amplification. "But I want everyone here to understand something. We didn't become heroes by riding motorcycles or wearing leather. We became heroes when we decided to care about each other." He gestured toward Maria and Emma. "This little girl taught us something important. She showed us that courage isn't about being fearless. It's about doing the right thing, even when you're terrified." Emma stepped forward, pulling Tank down to her level so she could whisper in his ear. He smiled and lifted her up, setting her on his shoulders so she could address the crowd. "Tank says I can talk now," Emma announced, her 7-year-old voice clear and confident. "I want everyone to know that these are real superheroes. They don't have capes or fly, but they protect people who need protecting. And that's what superheroes do." The crowd erupted in laughter and applause. Tank felt Emma's small hands gripping his shoulders as she waved to the people below, completely comfortable in her elevated position. "Also," Emma continued, "Tank is going to marry my mama, so now we're all going to be a family." Tank nearly choked on his surprise, feeling Maria's eyes on him as the crowd cheered even louder. Emma had apparently decided that some announcements couldn't wait for private moments. "Is that right, Mr. Rodriguez?" Mayor Wells asked with amusement. Tank looked at Maria, seeing her blushing smile and the love in her eyes that had grown over these weeks of crisis and resolution. "Well, I guess it is if Maria says yes." "Yes," Maria called out, her voice carrying clearly across the suddenly quiet square. "Yes, I say yes." The celebration that followed lasted until well after sunset. Local businesses had donated food and drinks. The high school band played patriotic songs, and children ran through the square playing games of bikers and heroes. As the evening wound down, Tank found himself sitting on a bench with Maria, watching Emma play with other children in the gazebo. The normalcy of it all still amazed him. This quiet life he'd never thought he deserved. "No regrets?" Maria asked. "About what?" "Choosing the legal way instead of the violent way. Trusting the system." Tank considered the question seriously. "Jake's in prison for 20 years. His hired muscle got 15 each. Emma feels safe again. No, I don't have any regrets." In the distance, his brotherhood was packing up the sound equipment, joking with local volunteers, planning next week's work schedules. They'd found what they'd been searching for without even knowing they were looking, a place to belong. 6 months after the ceremony in the town square, Maria stood behind the counter of Emma's place, the small cafe she'd opened on Main Street with financial backing from an unexpected source, the Iron Brotherhood's pooled savings and a small business loan, co-signed by half the town. The morning rush was in full swing, with familiar faces ordering their usual breakfast combinations. Chief Williams sat at his regular corner table, reading the newspaper while waiting for his coffee and Danish. Mrs. Henderson had claimed the window booth as her own, using it as an unofficial information center for neighborhood gossip and community planning. "Order up," called Diesel from the kitchen, where he'd found his calling as a short-order cook. His massive hands handled delicate eggs and pancakes with the same precision he'd once used for motorcycle engines. Emma, now 8 and radiating confidence, helped by wiping down tables and charming customers with her endless chatter about school, her friends, and her exciting new life with Tank Daddy, the name she'd given her stepfather, despite all attempts at more formal titles. Maria. "Honey," Mrs. Henderson called from her booth. "Did you see the application from that new family wanting to join the community? The Johnsons from Detroit?" "I saw it. Tank's handling the welcome committee duties this afternoon. The Iron Brotherhood had unofficially become Millbrook's welcoming committee for new residents, helping families move in, connecting them with local services, and making sure they felt included in the tight-knit community. It was a far cry from their outlaw reputation, but the transformation felt natural to everyone involved. The bell above the door chimed, and Tank entered wearing coveralls from Morrison's garage, where he'd taken a job as head mechanic. His hands were clean, but carried the honest stains of someone who worked with them for a living. "How's my favorite entrepreneur?" he asked, kissing Maria's cheek as she handed him his usual black coffee. "Booked solid through lunch. Mrs. Patterson wants to cater her daughter's wedding reception, and the Kiwanis Club asked about hosting their monthly meetings here. Sounds like success to me." Tank looked around the cafe with satisfaction. The walls were decorated with Emma's artwork, including several updated versions of her superhero drawings and photographs from community events. The Iron Brotherhood's presence was evident but subtle, a small plaque by the cash register thanking them for their investment, and a corner table permanently reserved for the founding partners, Tank Daddy. Emma appeared at his side, practically vibrating with excitement. "Guess what happened at school today?"
"What happened, little darling?"
"Mrs. Mitchell asked me to tell the class about community helpers, and I talked about you and Diesel and Cobra and everyone. And Tommy Simpson said his dad wants to learn to ride a motorcycle because bikers are cool now." Tank chuckled, remembering when parents had crossed the street to avoid his motorcycle. "Did you tell him about motorcycle safety?" "Uh-huh. And about how real bikers always help people and follow the law, and take care of their communities." Maria watched this exchange with the warm contentment of someone whose life had exceeded every dream she dared to have. The business license hanging behind the register represented more than financial independence. It was proof that she'd built something lasting. From the ashes of her old life. "Tank," she said as Emma ran off to help Diesel in the kitchen. "I got a call from the regional newspaper. They want to do a feature story about the cafe and how the community has changed. You comfortable with that kind of attention?" "I think so. It's not about us individually. It's about what we've all built together." Through the front window, they could see Cobra walking down Main Street with his now famous stray cat riding on his shoulder. He'd opened a small auto repair shop next to the hardware store and had become the unofficial town veterinarian for strays and injured animals. Hammer passed by on his lunch break from the city maintenance department, where he'd found purpose in keeping Millbrook's infrastructure running smoothly. Spider waved from across the street, where he was helping install new playground equipment at the elementary school. "You know what I love most about this place?" Tank said, watching his brothers going about their daily lives. "What?" "How normal it feels. How right it feels." Maria leaned against his shoulder, breathing in the familiar sense of coffee, bacon, and the promise of another peaceful day in their adopted hometown. "Emma asked me something yesterday," she said quietly. "What about?" "She wanted to know if we could have a baby brother or sister. Said the family needs to keep growing." Tank felt his heart skip. "And what did you tell her?" "I told her that was something her Tank Daddy and I would have to discuss." Tank pulled Maria closer, marveling at how completely his life had changed from that night when a terrified little girl had burst through the doors of the Rusty Chain. "I think Emma might be onto something," he said softly. 5 years had passed since that desperate night when Emma burst through the doors of the Rusty Chain and the autumn air carried the sounds of celebration through downtown Millbrook. The annual Heroes' Day festival had become the town's biggest event, drawing visitors from neighboring counties to witness the unlikely transformation story that had become local legend. Emma, now 12, and carrying herself with the confidence of someone who'd never doubted her place in the world, stood at the microphone in the town square. Her acceptance letter to the state's prestigious Math and Science Academy was clutched in her hand, the same hand that had once shaken with terror as she pleaded for help. 5 years ago, Emma began, her voice clear and strong. I was a scared little girl who thought the world was full of bad people. But then I met some men who taught me that heroes don't always look like what you expect. The crowd gathered around the gazebo included familiar faces that had aged gracefully over the half-decade. Mrs. Henderson, now 81, sat in her wheelchair surrounded by the extended family that had grown to include every member of the Iron Brotherhood. Chief Williams, retired but still commanding respect, stood beside his successor, who'd continued the department's partnership with the motorcycle club. Tank stood with Maria near the front of the crowd, his arm around his wife's shoulders as she held their 3-year-old son, Marcus Jr., Little Mark as Emma called him. The boy had his father's dark eyes and his mother's gentle smile, and Emma had appointed herself his primary protector and teacher. Tank taught me that being brave doesn't mean you're not scared, Emma continued. It means you do the right thing even when your hands are shaking and your heart is beating so fast you think everyone can hear it. Behind the crowd, the Iron Brotherhood's motorcycles were parked in their place of honor along Main Street. Fewer bikes now. Some of the older members had retired to Florida or Arizona, but the core group remained, their roots in Millbrook growing deeper each year. Diesel stood beside his wife, Jennifer, a nurse he'd met when his own daughter finally came to visit and decided to stay. His little girl, now 15, had Emma as her best friend and Tank as an honorary grandfather who taught both girls about motorcycle maintenance and life philosophy in equal measure. Cobra had married the local veterinarian, Dr. Sarah Chen, in a ceremony that featured his rescued cat as ring-bearer. They ran the most successful animal clinic in 3 counties, with Cobra's gentle touch with injured creatures becoming something of a regional legend. But the most important thing Tank and his family taught me, Emma said, her voice growing stronger, is that family isn't just about blood. It's about people who choose to love you and protect you and help you become the best version of yourself. Maria felt tears gathering in her eyes as she watched her their daughter, address the crowd with poise that reminded her of her own mother's strength. Emma had grown into everything Maria had hoped for during those dark months of running and hiding. I'm going to the State Academy next year to study engineering, Emma announced. And when I graduate from college, I'm coming back to Millbrook to build things that make our community even better. Because this is my home, and these are my people. The applause was thunderous, but Tank barely heard it. He was remembering that night 5 years ago when he'd knelt down to Emma's level in the smoky bar, promising to help her mother. He'd had no idea that helping one terrified child would lead to this, a life he'd never imagined possible. As the crowd began to disperse toward the food booths and carnival games, a young voice called out from the edge of the square, "Help! Please, somebody help!" Tank's head snapped toward the sound, his old instincts immediately alert. A boy, maybe 10 years old, was running toward the festival with tears streaming down his face. My sister fell in the creek. She can't swim. Tank was already moving before the boy finished speaking, his brotherhood falling in behind him like they had countless times before. But as they ran toward the emergency, Tank noticed something that filled him with pride. Emma was running alongside them, her acceptance letter forgotten on the ground behind her, ready to help however she could. The scared little girl, who'd once needed rescuing, had become someone who ran toward trouble to help others. The cycle of protection and courage continued, passed from one generation to the next, in a small town where outlaws had become heroes and heroes had become family. Some stories, Tank realized as they reached the creek where other community members were already forming a human chain to rescue the child, never really end. They just grow into something bigger and more beautiful than anyone could have imagined when they began.